My mom actually stepped in and said, we need a little bit of diversity in the household.
What was it about being in medicine that made you want to be building also?
Wow. Okay. I can say that the most valuable place actually to find these new ideas wasn't in the operating room. It was in the...
Most breakthroughs in healthcare don't come from new tools. They come when someone learns to see differently. Dr. Farzad Azimpour started out in cardiology before stepping into the world of design. He became a Stanford Biodesign Innovation Fellow, went on to lead health at IDEO, and now serves as Senior Vice President of Strategic Innovation at Edwards Lifesciences, where he runs an advanced technology incubator focused on heart failure. In this episode, we talk about why doctors sometimes need to unlearn old habits to spark true breakthroughs, how to avoid falling in love with your own ideas, and the simple bedtime question behind so many of Farzad's breakthroughs. This is a great conversation. I'm so excited for you to hear it. Let's dig in. Well, Farzad, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, David. It's great to be with you.
Great to always have an excuse to talk with you and hang out and catch up and everything.
Yeah, we've gone from phone calls, I think, when you were wrapping up medical school and surgical residency to now. So
Yeah.
it's been quite the journey.
Oh, speaking of medical school, I would love to go back to 2003 and ask you a question. So it's September 2003. Young Farzad is starting his medical journey in the beginning of medical school. And I'm so curious, what was the plan in your mind when you were starting out in day one?
Wow. Okay. So, I think I grew up in a medical family, and my dad, now retired, was a neurosurgeon. I really, I mean, to this day, I idolize him. He's my role model in every sense of the word. So I thought I was going to go down that path. And my mom actually stepped in about halfway that through that thought and said, we need a little bit of diversity in the household. So maybe consider something else. And fortunately, growing up in Houston, it's such a vibrant cardiovascular ecosystem in particular. A lot of early cardiovascular surgery was kind of hashed out in the Houston, Texas Medical Center ecosystem. It was a very competitive environment. And so people were always trying to, and to this day, I mean, it remains the case. People are really trying to push the boundaries in what they can do to offer new therapies to patients who don't have them today. And so I think that really, elevated the specialty, the organ system and how it's managed in the young eyes of all the kids growing up in and around Houston. So it was easy to shift my attention to cardiovascular.
That makes a lot of sense. You were involved in device development as early as your cardiology training. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I would say about 2 years into my cardiology fellowship, and mind you, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a business person. I just had kind of blinders on for medicine, cardiovascular medicine, some type of interventional angle on that too. And TAVR, transcatheter aortic valve replacement, became FDA approved at that time. And so all of a sudden you have this moment in medical history where a huge landscape in the management of a particular patient type gets turned upside down. And I felt compelled to somehow get involved playing in this space. And I didn't exactly have the tools with me, so I had to kind of access them through other routes. And kind of highlighting the importance of mentorship, I was so fortunate to have mentors around me who had done different things, who they themselves were cardiovascular specialists, but they had been fortunate to work on the entrepreneurial side and take their own ideas and those around them, move them forward into commercially successful technologies that benefited patients globally. And so that became my goal: is how do I become like them? And tricky thing is that the time that they learned and applied their methodology was a very different time. It was a different generation. So my challenge was, how do I now find a way to train myself to be trained, to find a community that would teach me the current approach or approaches to how to do this. So I needed to learn enough about intellectual property, enough about business, enough about reimbursement, regulatory affairs. I mean, kind of the whole package, but just enough to be um, useful to take something forward and to be able to prioritize my own ideas. It was at that time that I started looking for programs like this. And I was so fortunate to time things right. I guess, it wasn't my doing, but the timing was right that these programs were really starting to get off the ground. Biodesign had been at Stanford had been kind of the first in the field, and there were programs that were modeling their curriculum after this. Some taking on different approaches, maybe offering um, an experience to different levels of people in their training or in their career. And I found that Stanford's program really fit me well. I was so fortunate to have that chance to interview and spend the next year and what became the rest of my really career with that community at Stanford.
Such a magical community to be part of. And I still remember the feeling that I had when I sort of stumbled onto it in the interwebs. And so I'm hearing kind of a similar, I wouldn't call it an aha moment, but a moment of excitement on your end too.
These are things that in medical training we don't have a chance to really get exposed to unless you've had some other reason to do that, or you've had some other influence around you that would have introduced you to it. Um, Again, my background was purely from the medical, being surrounded by other physicians, nurses, techs, people who make the machine of healthcare move, but for direct patient care. So everything beyond that was completely unknown to me. And this was now my first chance to see what it was like. And it was just a sliver. I mean, that year goes by so quickly, but it just cracks you into that community. And all of a sudden you have contact information for people in probably every aspect of healthcare that you can imagine today. And they're at your fingertips, and you can test out different angles. uh, from a career standpoint, you can try things out. Luckily, at least for me, at that point in my life, I was able to be much more flexible than I am today. And so I could experiment with things and figure out what matched my personality type, what matched my motivations, what I was better at. And and I think I'm on the right-ish path. I feel more and more confident about that every day. But I'm still challenging myself is the point. Like, I'm still experimenting with things, even within my current role.
I'm curious if you go back to your headspace when you started looking around, you have a kind of concrete way of sharing that there were some tools that you needed and all the different skill sets that you were able to get exposure to during biodesign that you recognized you would need. I'm curious, how did you know that you wanted to do devices? And I guess I have a hunch here that I'm trying not to give away, but what was it about being in medicine that made you want to be building also?
The elephant in the room is that people who tend to go into surgical or interventional related specialties find themselves tinkering and using their hands and just breaking stuff. And so I found myself relating with that world really closely. I would say that before I had any exposure to these types of thinking, um, biodesign, needs driven innovation, I was doing it my own way, which is probably what most medical students and other medical trainees and practitioners do, which is you notice something in the hospital, you notice something during a procedure, and you immediately, in your mind, you're like, I would never do it that way, or I'm going to prevent that from happening next time. And then you immediately have like a list of solutions. And so I would have that list of problems and solutions on a 3x5 note card, and it stayed with me, and I would refresh it every morning. And by the end of the month, I would have a stack of note cards. And then I'm like, I don't know what to do with this stack of note cards. Like, how do I prioritize? Um, And then even more important than that, how would I put that into action? Like, it's great that I've identified these things, but I have no way of taking something forward. I myself can't build something. And I mean, I can try. I can do things with low fidelity prototyping that anybody can do. I can sketch things out, and it doesn't have to be in a professional way, but just some way of communicating my thoughts onto paper, or some way of communicating to my mentor so that he or she can help bridge me to someone who can help out. And that's what I ended up doing during my cardiology fellowship, um, is taking on some of those topics that I observed in a clinical setting, in a procedural setting, I should say, and sketching out what I thought was a solution, and then using that to communicate to my mentors. And it did open up doors. But I would say now, having had the luxury of seeing that phase of work done in different ways, I can say that the most valuable place actually to find these new ideas wasn't in the operating room or in the cath lab. It was in the clinic. And it was deeply understanding and communicating with patients and their families and their loved ones, conversations that sometimes the nurse would have before a physician would walk into the room. And the nurse would give you a heads up on some issues. You would have in your mind topics like why this patient would or would not be a good candidate for a particular course of action, or pathway, therapeutic pathway. But combining their conversations, what they gathered from their conversations with what we gathered, we found the whole world starts to get opened up in an entirely different way. Finding out the patients who don't get the therapy that we've, been so excited to develop. What happens to them? And so that then became a really interesting point of focus, is finding those people, asking why they don't qualify for something, and really exploring opportunities there.
I think that's so interesting, and that's such a unexpected surprise when digging into the world of innovation. You think the secrets are all going to be held in the mind, and in the sort of untapped ideas that you and everyone in the space has been sitting on, and you find it unexpectedly in an offhand comment. I'd love to talk about IDEO for a few minutes, and then I'm really excited to get to what you're doing right now with Edwards. But it's so interesting looking at your career, at the different ways that you have been immersed in innovation. And I think of biodesign as this very pure academic, pure sense of innovation. I think of your work, at least me from the outside at IDEO, as kind of being like the consultant and the traffic conductor that projects and requests are coming to. And Edwards sounds like it's a very different take. Would you be able to share your experience at IDEO a little bit, and what that was like, and how that contrasted with what you had just learned about innovation at Biodesign?
Yeah, so the IDEO experience for me started with an externship. And so during your fellowship year at Biodesign, you have a 1 month opportunity to step outside of campus. And some people will go to venture capital for a month to understand what that world is like. Some people will go to a big medical device or pharmaceutical company to experience what that's like. Some people will go to a startup, and others will go to a design firm or other things. This is your chance to be creative. And at that time, I said, I don't know when I'll have a chance to go to a design firm again. That sounds pretty interesting. What does that mean? So for 1 month, I walked in the door on the first day, and there's a neurosurgeon who had just completed his fellowship training across the street at Stanford. There was an industrial designer, a mechatronics engineer, a mechanical engineer, um, someone who was in the middle of their general surgery residency at Stanford, and this counted towards her research years and requirements in the middle of surgery. And everywhere you look in this building or these buildings, you see some of the most interesting people you can imagine. And you look across the room and you're like, that person is the best person imaginable in that field. And so to have the chance to then spend time with them um, was really an opportunity of a lifetime. What another piece to this is that at Stanford during the fellowship you're assigned a topic, and it's generally like an organ system. So, for instance, one year it's cardiovascular, the next year it's ophthalmology or oncology, some type of specialty. And um, but now when you step into a consulting firm, you are presented with different topics across the space, um, different organ systems, different everything, different types of projects, from digital health to pharmaceutical patient experience to medical device design, a whole range of different topics. So now it's like rapid fire. You get to interact with different types of teams who are put together very carefully to take on different interesting topics with different stakeholders. And so in that 1 month, even, I was able to have so many interactions with people, so many interesting ones. And by the end of that month, I was so fortunate um, to extend my stay, let's say, past graduation. And it was only supposed to be for maybe a year until we kind of figured out what made sense. And then it accidentally ended up being about just under 4 years. I'm so happy to say that my relationships with all of my colleagues there remained, and still to this day I stay in contact with them. But that really opened up my eyes because now I have a chance to interact with technical people from other companies outside of IDEO, with leadership, and learning how to communicate and learning how to be a bridge between medicine and the design objective that they had come to us for.
Such an interesting transition from what you had just been doing in biodesign to, like you said, being a bridge now. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about what you're doing at Edwards. And you wear so many hats. I'm really curious in particular about the difference between the dynamic at IDEO when you are sort of fielding inbound requests for help from companies with their own prerogatives to being at Edwards and having a very clear mission, and what that looks like at the innovation level.
So I would say that this has been really the culmination of a lot of different aspects in my life. And I would have never predicted or expected this role to exist, this set of challenges to exist in a company. And so what we're doing, Edwards is focused on structural heart disease. And we try to go as deep as we can so that we can offer the best, latest kind of creation of new therapeutic categories. And it's not about saying, hey, we're, you know, it's not about bragging rights. It's about when you're first into a space or you've created the best technology in that space, you have a seat at the table when it comes to determining policy and kind of setting the standards for how that therapy will mature in every aspect, how the world will receive that technology. So when you have that moment, um, it's an important one to capitalize on because now you can focus then the next steps on offering the patients who truly need it the therapy that they deserve. And when you're able to move quickly, you can do that. So the way that we take it on at Edwards is there's internal innovation, and we have organic teams like the teams that I run in our incubator that are trying to come up with the next most interesting topic and then solving for that topic.
I'm really curious what you think, if you think there's anything that doctors need to unlearn. Did you have to unlearn anything as you went from Farzad with a stack of index cards in your scrubs pocket to what you're doing now? And do you think that doctors with this creative fire in their soul have to unlearn things to be successful, or what does that transition look like?
Yeah, personally, I definitely had to unlearn things. A lot of it is in the form of communication. I'm more critical of myself now in how I communicate with teammates, with colleagues, um, people all the way up and down the so-called hierarchy. When we're training in medicine, we have very defined hierarchies, and you behave a certain way in that hierarchy. And you try to be as diplomatic as you can, obviously. I mean, we're still we're in a modern era. But even still, there are things that need to be broken when you move into this space. One of them is, and this should be apparent on day one, is recognizing that your teammates who have maybe no medical training have as good, if not better, ideas. And the objective now is for you to find your maximum respect for their background and what they bring to the table and try to boost it. And they will do the same to you in return. So, for instance, I may say something that doesn't make engineering sense, and I'll qualify it before I say that usually. And my engineering buddies are going to say, okay, I see where you're going with that. Let me help you get to the next level of thinking.
Hmm.
And the same happens in reverse. If they say something that doesn't make physiologic sense or medical sense, whatever, my job isn't to criticize it necessarily, at least not at that moment. It's to pause and take a step back and say, I see where you're going. Let me help you get to the next level. And that's kind of an art and a practice that gets better every day. Hopefully, we're using it all the time and we're communicating. But it becomes more and more important also in how we assess people who we're bringing on to join our team. How capable do we think they are of learning that and applying that mentality? Have they already done it, or do they have are we confident that they're going to be able to do it? And so I think that's been one of the biggest kind of learning points for myself.
It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to force yourself to yank that filter out when you have an idea that is just too stupid to share. But I mean, it popped into your mind for a reason during a brainstorm, and it's tough. And then it's probably a second degree of difficulty to help someone not do that with themselves, since you aren't necessarily in their mind and don't want them to hide this gold from the world that they don't appreciate as gold, maybe.
Totally. I've found that I take more notes now in silence as I'm listening to people talk and just letting them get their thoughts out on the table and letting things just sit a little bit first. And then finding the moment where, there's always this balance between, are we in generative mode or are we in focus mode, and not disrupting the balance of the conversation that's happening at that time.
Hmm.
But also not losing your thoughts that hopefully we're going to lead to some new interesting pathway.
Yeah.
So I think it's natural to struggle with that, and it's a good thing, because it just means that we're thinking all the time. We're just trying to think about how to best position that new idea into the conversation that will give it its best shot. And sometimes that best shot is just being shot down, and that's okay too. I remember being so convinced when I was a cardiology fellow that this idea that I have is the next big thing. And I was so convinced of that. And then I'm so glad that I that I then had the next series of experiences to teach me how to handle that emotion. Because as important as it is to be able to fall in love with your ideas, I think it's a great thing actually. Like, get passionate about it, fall in love with your ideas, but equally you should be able to fall out of love with those ideas and break up with those ideas. So that's
Yes.
the harder part, and I'm still learning that. I mean, it's again, I think it's a human thing for us to want to get excited about things, and then losing things, whether it's through a rational discussion or something that's less clear. But even still, decisions have to get made. We have to move forward and prioritize things. So we learn every day kind of how to handle that and how to see it as a great thing, like having the privilege to experiment with things, to test different types of things, and to select something. That's a huge privilege. And most people don't ever get a chance to do something like that. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun.
You mentioned something a couple minutes ago about ideas, and I think the phrase you used was giving that idea that it's almost like the best chance to succeed. And it made me think of, is it Rick Rubin? That's who it was. I don't know if you've read The Creative Act, but there's this book written by Rick Rubin, who I think is the producer of Def Jam Records, or just incredible music catalog, who sometimes talks about ideas as these mystical things. And I'm going to mess up this paraphrase, but he had basically said, if you have an idea and you don't do anything with it, and then one day you see it's out there, it's not that someone copied your idea before you could, but that it's an idea whose time has come. And he has this way of talking about ideas as almost these sort of inevitable things that are going to emerge or not emerge. I don't know if there's a question in here or not, but there's this interesting dynamic between an inevitability of something that's going to bubble up and sort of survive, and you peel away the layers in your brainstorm, versus this thing where someone says something that's about to be filtered out for being too crazy to say out loud, but they say it, and then you say, you know what, wait a minute, there's a kernel of something in there, and you're kind of building this out of thin air. And I think it's just interesting as a dynamic looking at the two.
That reminds me of there's there's an artist's work on display at the San Francisco MoMA I came across maybe last year, Rauschenberg. It was from 1951, and it was these white panels that were just painted white panels. And you look at it and you think, these are white panels. What am I supposed to be looking for here? And actually, the intention of those panels was for them to be a reflective surface of what's around them. It reminds us all, I think, that so much of what's new is a reflection. So much of this creation or art, as we call it, is reflected in what's already around us.
Mm.
And that depends on the time, too. Like what's around us today will be reflected in a new creation shortly thereafter. What was around people 500 years ago will have or would have been reflected in a new creation around that era. And so it's only a matter of time before something new gets created that's a reflection.
Oh,
And
that's so cool.
it also reminds me of this experience that I had as I was trying to teach myself about intellectual property in cardiology fellowship. I got this book. It's called Patent It Yourself. And that was my intro to intellectual property.
Ah,
But I yeah, I recommend that book to medical trainees if they just want to like start learning the language. And in addition to reading that book, I was reading as many patents as I could in the space that I was interested in at that time. I would come across things that were really shocking to me because I thought of that exact same thing. How is it possible that this person was in my mind? And I could have sworn this was an original idea of mine. And I look at the date and it was like 20 years ago. That's when I really started to understand the speed at which people think based on the problems of the day and some people's ability to see a step or two beyond that. Um, I think it's encouraging that humanity has the ability to do that. Like it's actually really, really cool that people can see that. They can see what's in front of them, they can see what's around them, but they can also begin to put the pieces together and identify patterns that see one or two steps ahead. And that's just fascinating.
that's crazy. That is really neat. You know, your patent it yourself book makes me think of something that I want to make sure that we touch on today, um, which is thinking of the person listening who has this creative spark, creative soul in their heart, um, who maybe hasn't been able to realize it, and it's painful. And I think for me, and I suspect for you, and for many people who've come through something like biodesign, uh, the answer has been, "Oh, you get into biodesign, you do biodesign, and then you have an entrance, or you sort of learn all the biodesign things, and then you have an entrance, or maybe not an entrance handed to you, um, but you kind of have the pieces and maybe the connections. What would you tell your younger self who had this fire if biodesign didn't exist? What would you tell someone who's living in a part of the country where maybe they're surrounded by unmet needs, but not necessarily people who are developing technology? Um, how does someone who hasn't been lucky enough to get dropped into the perfect environment get a taste of being in that world and step into that world?
It's a great question. I think that we get put onto a team when we start at biodesign, and all of a sudden, just like that, you have experts within 20 inches of you, your desk space,
Yeah.
um, who are engineers, business people. I mean, it's like right there for you. And if you don't have that immediate access, I think something that you can try to do, that will position you even for later, maybe for an experience like that, is just make sure that you break outside of your study group. Like, I remember my study group was obviously my medical school classmates because we were studying for the same exams.
Yeah.
Um, but are there other people to surround yourselves with? Walk across campus, go hang out at the coffee shop at the engineering quad. Go, I I don't know how people meet each other these days, actually. It's like a totally different world. But take classes that put you in a position to interact with people outside of your area of study focus. And hopefully what will come from that is a collection of tight people around you who you feel comfortable and safe with, just bouncing rough ideas off of that are partially formed. So this whole like partially formed thoughts in my friend group here now, with kindergarten, first grade parents, I've got friends in finance. I've got like friends in spaces that I'd never had friends before. But like we do this all the time with each other too, is that from a generative mindset standpoint, we're always like throwing ideas just kind of in an entertaining way, really. But I'll say like, hey, like obviously I'm not a finance expert, but I've got a crazy idea. And like I haven't fully thought this through, but like think with me on this. And we'll just kick things around. And by the end of the night, we've had like a really fun, entertaining time just playing around with loosely formed ideas. And so I think finding that group that gives you the feeling of safety and the feeling of encouragement to do that, um, is something that I think you can get anywhere outside of any program. It just takes a lot of experimentation to find those people.
I love that. Final question. What do you do when you want to get inspired?
Before I go to bed, I ask myself a question and I think about a question. So I find that inspiration. I let my mind do the turning overnight, do the synthesis overnight.
Wow. Is this an intentional process where before you go to bed, you plant an idea that you've been struggling with and let your brain do it? Or just
Yeah. Yeah.
what does that look like?
The latest thing is me like trying to redesign the landscaping in front of the house. So I'll play around in my mind with like different blends of, okay, should there be grass here? Should there be decomposed granite here? What types of plants would go in one section versus the other? I'll go deep into plants. Like I can go deep into plants, and then I'll just fall asleep. I will just rely on faith that over the next like week or so, if I keep asking myself that question before bed, that something will come.
That's so cool.
It is based on consistency and faith. You just have to stick with it. And of course, I try to do that for physiologic things too. But I warm myself up with botany.
Perfect. What a great way to bring it all together.
It is fun. And I can knock out multiple birds with one stone.
Farzad, is there anywhere that you would suggest I send folks to find you online or find what you're working on or anything you're passionate about that you'd like me to direct folks to?
Well, I mean, I encourage everyone to take a look at the Stanford Biodesign website. Uh, the Masalam Center for Biodesign at Stanford changed my life, definitely. I mean, even had I gone back and practiced full-time clinical medicine, an experience like that as a fellow completely changes how you think about and interact with patients and their families, how you think about their outcomes and what's important to them. It's a total shift. Even if you think you've got it, there's so much more to gain from an experience like that. If you find yourself in a different phase of life and you are committed to cardiovascular medicine or surgery as your specialty, if you're in the middle of your fellowship already or in the middle of your residency, training to be a cardiovascular physician or surgeon, we have our Innovation Fellowship at Edwards Lifesciences that I encourage you to take a look at. It's called the Cardiovascular Innovation Fellowship. And these two programs, I think, um, are, are are positioned to create a physician innovator of the future. Now, of course, you may not be a physician, you may be coming from a different background altogether, but as a physician, I think an experience like this will position you for kind of the next generation of almost requirements. I mean, these are requirements that we understand these different aspects of the technology development process, um, so that not only so that we appreciate it, but so that we can be partners with entities that are trying to bring these things into patient care. So the better we as physicians can understand what needs to happen to develop something, um, the better we can advocate for things, the better we can describe things to patients who might be considering an experimental therapy, and all in the hopes of it advancing something more quickly to an understanding, so that we can de-risk things and have them appropriately positioned for patient use. And so um, I, I I couldn't be happier with these new types of offerings. And had I been a student even years earlier learning about these, I think that would have been a great thing. So hopefully this message gets out and students are considering these programs.
Farzad, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks so much, David. It's always a pleasure reconnecting with you, and look forward to all that we have together.
Same here.